When I first moved into Maple Creek Estates, I thought I had finally found peace. The streets were lined with tall oaks. Kids rode bikes in the afternoons, and every neighbor smiled when you passed by. The houses looked like they were taken straight out of a real estate magazine. Fresh paint, white fences, manicured lawns. I remember thinking, this is it, my forever home. For the first week, everything seemed perfect. Then the knock came. It was early Saturday morning when I opened the door and saw her, Karen. Short blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, and a clipboard that looked like it held the secrets of the universe. She didn't introduce herself with a smile or a welcome to the neighborhood. Instead, she pointed to my driveway and said, "Your trash cans are visible from the street. That's an HOA violation." I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. She handed me a printed notice, with the Maple Creek HOA logo on top, a fine for $50 if I didn't correct the issue within 24 hours. That was my first introduction to the infamous HOA president. At first, I tried to stay polite. I moved the trash cans, painted the mailbox she claimed was fading, and even trimmed my bushes to meet visual uniformity. But no matter what I did, she found something wrong. One week it was the color of my porch light. The next it was the non-approved wind chime that supposedly disrupted the community's peaceful atmosphere. The neighbors seemed nice at first, but slowly they started avoiding me. They'd wave half-heartedly or cross the street when they saw me coming. I noticed how Karen always had little meetings on her porch with them, whispering and glancing toward my house. Then one morning, I woke up to find my car covered in deep scratches, long, deliberate marks across the hood and doors. I called the police, but without proof there wasn't much they could do. That evening, I saw a new camera installed on the HOA's streetlight, pointed directly at my driveway. When I asked about it, Karen told me it was for community safety, but the way she said it made my skin crawl. It was around then that I found a note tucked under my front door. It wasn't signed, just a piece of paper with one line written in bold black marker. "Stop fighting, Karen, you'll regret it." I remember standing there holding that note, my hands trembling. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, maybe one of the bored teens in the neighborhood. But deep down I knew it was something else. There was a strange heaviness in the air whenever I passed Karen's house. The next HOA meeting confirmed my fears. Karen called me out publicly, accusing me of disturbing the harmony of the neighborhood. I stood up to defend myself, but the looks from everyone else, cold, silent, avoiding my eyes, told me I was already the enemy. When I walked back home that night, I saw Karen standing by her gate watching me. No smile, no words, just that cold, knowing stare that made my stomach twist. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about rules or fines. Karen wanted control, total control, and I had somehow become her target. What I didn't know then was just how far she was willing to go to prove her power. The night it happened, the air felt strangely still, heavy like the kind of silence that comes before a storm. I'd been up late sorting through insurance papers and old receipts, trying to take my mind off the constant tension in the neighborhood. It was close to midnight when I finally decided to call it a night. I remember locking the back door, turning off the lights and pausing for a second before heading upstairs. Everything seemed too quiet. Then I smelled it. Faint at first, like someone had lit a distant bonfire, but it grew stronger, sharper, until it stung my nose. I ran to the window and saw an orange flicker reflecting off the glass. My heart dropped. Flames were crawling up my front porch. I rushed outside barefoot, shouting for help. The dry wind fed the fire like it was alive, twisting and roaring as it spread to the side of the house. The paint blistered, glass cracked, and in minutes the porch collapsed into a pile of burning wood. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and called 911. "Please hurry. My house is on fire." By the time the firefighters arrived, the flames were out of control. The heat was so intense it felt like my skin was burning even from the street. Neighbors began stepping out of their homes, gathering in clusters under the pale streetlights. Some whispered, some filmed, but one person stood out right at the edge of my driveway. Karen. She was standing there in her robe, arms crossed, watching. Not horrified, not worried, just watching. The glow of the fire danced in her glasses, and for a split second I could swear she was smirking. When the fire was finally contained, my home was gone, half reduced to ash, the rest charred and black. I sat on the curb, covered in soot, staring at the ruins. My mind raced with questions. How did it start? Why so fast? Could it have been electrical? But deep down, my gut whispered a name: Karen. The next morning, I walked through what was left, the smell of smoke still thick in the air. The fire investigator was already there, combing through the wreckage. He looked up when he saw me and said, "This wasn't accidental." I felt my stomach twist. "What do you mean?" He pointed to the ground near the fence line, dark stains that smelled faintly of gasoline. Someone poured accelerant here and at the side of the house. The fire was started deliberately. I froze. My heart started pounding so hard I could barely speak. "You mean someone did this on purpose?" He nodded grimly. "We'll run samples, but this looks like arson." I thought of Karen instantly. The arguments, the warnings, the camera, the note that said "you'll regret it." It all came flooding back. I told the investigator everything. Her constant harassment, the threats, the scratches on my car, the note. He listened carefully, taking notes, and then looked at me with a serious expression. "There's one more thing," he said quietly. "We found traces of the same accelerant along the property line between your house and hers." That sentence hit me like a punch. My legs almost gave out. She lived right next door. She had access to my yard. She knew my schedule, my routines, everything. That evening, when I got back to the temporary motel the Red Cross had arranged for me, I opened my phone and saw something that made my blood boil. Karen had posted on the HOA's Facebook group. "So tragic what happened last night. We've warned our neighbors several times about fire hazards and poor home maintenance. Let this be a reminder to keep our community safe." There it was. She was blaming me, twisting the story like she always did. But this time I wasn't going to stay quiet. I called the investigator again. I told him about her post, about her history, about everything she'd done to make my life miserable. He told me they were already looking into her. There were surveillance records, witnesses, and most importantly, some inconsistencies in her own statements. That night, as I lay awake in the motel bed staring at the ceiling, I kept replaying her face in my mind, that calm, almost satisfied look as my home burned to the ground, and I made myself a promise. If she really was behind this, I was going to make sure she never hurt anyone else again. The investigation felt like it dragged on forever. Weeks passed and I lived out of a motel room surrounded by what little I had managed to save from the fire. A few clothes, some papers, and the charred remains of a photo frame that used to hold a picture of my family. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was the detective with news. But most days it wasn't. The HOA stayed eerily silent. No one reached out. No one asked how I was. Not even the neighbors who used to wave to me. It was as if I'd become invisible, erased from the community I once called home. Then out of nowhere, a notice arrived in my email from the HOA board. It read, "Due to property neglect and violation of neighborhood safety codes, your membership in the HOA is suspended pending review." I almost laughed. My house had burned to the ground and they were accusing me of neglect. But I knew exactly whose idea that was. Karen's fingerprints were all over it. When I contacted my insurance company, I hit another wall. They told me there were concerns about the fire's origin, and that an investigation had been launched to make sure there was no fraud involved. My stomach dropped. That was her. She had started rumors that I'd torched my own home for insurance money. I was angry, beyond angry. I went back to the fire investigators and begged them to check her cameras, the ones she had aimed right at my driveway. But the HOA refused to release the footage. They claimed the data had been corrupted during a power outage. I didn't believe that for a second. Days turned into weeks, and I started to lose hope. Karen was walking free, still holding HOA meetings like nothing had happened. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. A teenage boy knocked on my motel room door. I recognized him. He was the kid who delivered newspapers around the neighborhood. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder before speaking. "You're the guy whose house burned, right?" he asked. I nodded slowly. He swallowed hard and said, "I think I have something you need to see." He pulled out his phone and showed me a video. My heart started racing as I watched the footage. It was recorded from across the street, shaky but clear enough. It showed Karen that same night, walking near my property line just before midnight. She was wearing a hooded jacket and carrying a red gas can. I froze, my mouth dry. "Can you send that to me?" I asked, barely able to breathe. He nodded. I didn't know what to do, but my mom said I should come forward. That video changed everything. I took it straight to the police the next morning. They sent it to forensics for verification, and within days the match was confirmed. The gas can, her movements, the timeline, all of it lined up perfectly with the fire's origin. 2 days later, Karen was arrested. When I heard the news, I didn't feel joy. Not at first. Just a deep, hollow relief, like I had been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. I watched the police lead her away in handcuffs from her pristine white house, her perfectly trimmed roses in the background. She didn't fight or cry. She just looked straight ahead, emotionless. But the reaction from the neighborhood was strange. Some people were shocked, whispering that there had to be a mistake. Others defended her, saying she was too kind to do something like that. A few even hinted that I must have set her up. It was like everyone had forgotten how she'd treated people for years. The fines, the intimidation, the power trips. Still, the evidence was solid. The county charged her with arson, property destruction, and malicious intent. Her bond was set high, and for the first time in a long time I felt like justice was close. But that feeling didn't last. A week later I received a notice from the court. The trial would begin soon, and I would have to testify. My stomach twisted at the thought of facing her again. The image of her smiling in the firelight haunted me every night. I told myself I was ready, that I'd finally get closure. But deep down, I had no idea that the courtroom would hold another surprise. One that would shake everything I thought I knew about her, and the system that had let her thrive for so long. The morning of the trial, the sky was gray and heavy, like it knew what kind of day it was going to be. I sat outside the courthouse in my car for a long time, just staring at the building. My palms were slick with sweat. I'd been waiting months for this. Months of restless nights. Burned memories and fighting to be heard, and yet, as the moment finally came, I felt small. When I walked into the courtroom, my heart started racing. It wasn't huge, but every creak of the wooden benches and every shuffle of papers seemed to echo. Reporters sat along the back wall. A few neighbors were there too, whispering to each other. And then I saw her, Karen. She was sitting at the defense table in a pale pink suit, hair perfectly styled, hands folded neatly on her lap. She looked like she was at a brunch, not a felony trial. When our eyes met, she gave me the faintest smile, calm, confident, even smug. It sent chills down my spine. The prosecutor began by laying out the facts, the fire, the accelerant, the video of her walking near my property line with a gas can. They showed photos of the damage, the blackened walls, the melted furniture, the spot where the fire started. Every image made my stomach twist, but I forced myself to look. I wanted her to see that I wasn't afraid. Then they played the video. The shaky footage from the teenager's phone filled the screen. The room went silent. There she was, Karen, moving through the shadows, carrying the red gas can. When she disappeared behind the fence, the timestamp on the screen read 11:58 p.m. My house caught fire at 12:05. Gasps rippled through the room. A few people turned toward her. She just sat still, her face blank, as if she was watching someone else. When it was my turn to testify, my voice trembled at first, but the words came pouring out. Everything from the constant harassment to the note on my door, the scratches on my car, and the fake violations. I told the jury how it felt to watch my home burn, knowing deep down who had done it. Then came her lawyer's turn. He stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket, and said, "Your Honor, before we proceed, I need to clarify something crucial. My client wasn't trespassing or acting maliciously that night. She was performing an official inspection." Murmurs spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor frowned. I blinked, not sure I heard right. The lawyer continued. "Karen works for the county fire department's safety board. There was a complaint about this property being a fire hazard due to improper disposal of chemicals and waste materials. She was conducting a routine safety check." My mouth fell open. That was a lie, a complete fabrication. The judge asked for evidence of the inspection, and the defense produced a neatly organized file, reports, signatures, and a time-stamped complaint form from the HOA. For a moment, even the prosecutor looked unsure, but something didn't sit right with me. Karen had never mentioned working for the county. She was always retired, or so she'd told everyone. And those documents, they looked too perfect. The prosecutor requested the digital files for review. It took the court's tech specialist less than an hour to expose the truth. The inspection documents had been created after her arrest. The digital timestamps showed they were forged the day after police took her into custody. Even the signatures were fake, copied from real county officials. The moment the truth came out, the entire courtroom shifted. You could feel it. The air got heavier, like everyone finally realized who they were dealing with. Karen didn't flinch. Not once. She just sat there, staring straight ahead, her jaw tight. The prosecutor leaned on the table and said quietly, almost like a whisper meant for the jury, "She didn't just burn down a home, she tried to burn down the truth." After that, it was over. The defense's case fell apart completely. Every lie she had built began to crumble. The HOA board members who had backed her tried to distance themselves, pretending they didn't know anything. But the damage was done. The judge adjourned the court for the day, saying sentencing would take place after closing statements. As everyone began to leave, Karen was escorted out by the bailiff. She turned her head just enough to look at me, that same faint, cold smile on her face. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. She wasn't afraid. She didn't feel guilt or shame. To her, this wasn't justice. It was a game she thought she could still win. And as I stood in the quiet, empty courtroom, I wondered just how many people she had fooled before me, and how many more she might have, if I hadn't survived that night. The final day of the trial felt surreal. The courthouse was packed. Neighbors, reporters, even people from nearby towns came to see the verdict. The air buzzed with quiet tension. I sat on the same bench I'd sat on for days, fingers tapping against my knee, my heart pounding in rhythm with the ticking clock on the wall. When the bailiff finally called everyone to stand, Karen was let in. She looked different now. Her hair wasn't as neat, her suit a little wrinkled, her expression less confident. But that cold stillness was still there, that same unsettling calm that had haunted me since the night of the fire. The judge entered, the jury filed in, and time seemed to stretch. I could hear the faint sound of rain tapping against the windows. Then the foreperson stood. "Your Honor, we, the jury, find the defendant, Karen Mitchell, guilty on all counts, arson, destruction of property, and falsification of official documents." It was like the air left the room. For a moment, no one moved. Then a low murmur rippled through the crowd. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like months, my chest finally loosening. Karen didn't react. No tears, no outrage. Just a small tilt of her head as if she was processing the words like they belonged to someone else. When the judge announced her sentence, 15 years in state prison, she finally turned her eyes toward me. And there it was again, that same chilling smile. I didn't look away. I wanted her to see that she hadn't broken me. After the trial, I stepped outside into the drizzle. The courthouse steps were slick with rain and the air smelled clean, almost new. Reporters swarmed with microphones and questions, but I barely heard them. I just stood there watching the police car pull away with Karen inside. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the wet pavement, and for the first time since that awful night, I felt something close to peace. The neighborhood changed after her conviction. The HOA board crumbled almost immediately. Some members resigned in shame. Others tried to deny they'd ever supported her. The rules she had enforced so ruthlessly were torn up, and the signs around the community that once read Maple Creek Estates, Excellence in Order, were quietly taken down. A few months later, I began rebuilding my home. The lot was still scarred with ashes, but I refused to leave it that way. Every day after work, I'd stop by and watch the construction, brick by brick, wall by wall, until my house began to rise again. The smell of fresh wood and paint slowly replaced the memory of smoke. Neighbors who had avoided me before started to wave again. Some even apologized, saying they'd been too afraid to stand up to her. I didn't hold grudges. Fear has a way of turning good people silent. When my new home was finally finished, I held a small gathering. Nothing fancy, just coffee, cookies, and a few folding chairs on the porch. The laughter that filled the air that evening felt like healing. For the first time, Maple Creek didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like home again. Still, some nights when the wind blows just right, I swear I can still smell the faint trace of smoke. It's not real, just a ghost of what used to be. But it reminds me evil doesn't always look like danger. Sometimes it looks like a friendly wave from a neighbor, a clipboard with rules, or a smile that hides something darker. I rebuilt my house stronger this time. Concrete walls, new alarms, security cameras I control. But more importantly, I rebuilt myself. I learned that standing up for what's right can cost everything, but letting fear win costs even more. Now, when I sit on my new porch at sunset, watching the lights flicker across Maple Creek, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel gratitude, and not for what happened, but for what it taught me. Karen took my home, but she didn't take my voice. And in the end, that's what saved me. If you thought HOA drama couldn't get worse, think again. One woman's obsession with control cost her everything, and one man's fight for justice proved that truth can rise from the ashes. If you were in his place, would you rebuild in the same neighborhood? Or walk away forever? Tell us in the comments below. And don't forget, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another real-life story that's stranger and scarier than fiction.